Can't sleep? That's okay. Let the night drift quietly past while I take you somewhere familiar, even if you've never been there. This is Dreamside Stories, not your average bedtime storyteller. Tonight, we're going to Betondorp, a quiet corner of Amsterdam where the bricks remember war and the streets once echoed with the light rhythm of a boy chasing a ball. Not far from there stood De Meer, the stadium of Ajax, modest, gray, tucked between houses and fields. It was more than a stadium. For one boy, it was a gateway. He could see it from his window, and one day he stepped onto its pitch. His name was Johan, and he would never see the game or the world the way others did. So close your eyes. We're going back to the beginning. There is a silence that only early morning knows. A stillness where the world seems to pause just for a moment before the noise returns. In one of those moments, in a small gray corner of post-war Amsterdam, a revolution began. Not with fanfare or flags, but with the echo of a ball striking a brick wall, again and again. Betondorp, the concrete village, rows of modest houses, straight streets, smoke rising from chimneys. It was a neighborhood built on post-war necessity, not beauty. But in its plainness lived a kind of poetry. This was the stage where Johan Cruyff was born, not just into the world, but into movement, into instinct, into something bigger than football. He didn't grow up surrounded by glory. He grew up surrounded by rhythm. The squeak of bicycle wheels on damp pavement. The soft splash of canal water against stone. The knock of a worn football rebounding off the side of a corner shop. These were the sounds of his childhood, and they taught him things no coach ever could. His father ran a small grocery store, just a few blocks from Ajax Stadium, De Meer. It was the kind of shop where regulars chatted about nothing, where fruit crates stood outside in neat rows. Johan often lingered nearby, kicking a ball against the wall, never still, never not thinking. His world was small, but in his mind, he traveled endlessly, imagining passes, space, movement, timing. Then came the fracture. At 12 years old, Johan lost his father. Just like that, the warmth of home dimmed. The days felt colder, the house quieter. But grief has strange effects. For some, it freezes them. For Johan, it fueled him. He turned even more to the game, to that round object that obeyed only those who understood its language. His mother began cleaning at Ajax to make ends meet. Johan would follow her, wandering the empty stadium as she worked. He'd sit alone, in the stands, looking out at the pristine grass, watching how the light changed across the pitch. Even in silence, he was studying the game. Not how to run faster or kick harder, but how it all connected. He saw the game like a map, a puzzle, a flow. The streets of Betondorp became his first school, not just for touch and control, but for imagination. Chalk goals on brick walls, crates turned into goalposts, narrow alleys demanding perfect turns. Everything was improvised. Every play, a decision. Every mistake, a lesson. He wasn't just learning to play. He was learning to see. He wasn't the biggest or the fastest. But already, something inside him moved differently. He didn't chase the ball. He guided it. He didn't follow the game. He shaped it. Where others saw chaos, he saw options, possibilities, angles. His body hadn't caught up with his vision yet, but that vision was relentless. In his bedroom, posters of Ajax legends hung above a worn wooden floor. A ball always lay nearby. He wasn't dreaming of fame. He was dreaming of understanding, of control, of making the game obey thought. Outside, Amsterdam was changing, the scars of war fading, the city waking up. But Johan was already ahead of it, in thought, in movement, in purpose. And through all of this, the stadium stood there, quiet, towering, watching. One day, its gates would open for him. Before the world knew his name, before tactics bent around his will, Johan Cruyff found himself standing at the edge of something vast. A club, a culture, a calling. Ajax was more than a team. It was a canvas, and it needed someone bold enough to paint in colors no one had imagined yet. The stadium gates that once seemed like barriers now opened wide. Demir, once a distant monument in his childhood landscape, became the center of his universe. The air smelled of grass, damp stone, and possibility. This wasn't street football anymore. This was structured, sacred. But Johan didn't conform. He transformed. He entered the Ajax system as a teenager, thin, quiet, curious. Others followed instructions. Johan asked questions. Why train like this? Why play that way? His mind was already ahead of his feet, and slowly, the club began to notice. Behind the scenes, Rinus Michels was watching. A former player turned coach with a vision of his own. He didn't want robots on the field. He wanted thinkers, architects. He saw something in Johan. Not just speed or skill, but insight. Together, they would become the architects of a new football. Ajax in the early 1960s was a club in transition. The war was over, but Dutch football still felt stuck in the mud. Rigid, slow, built on tradition rather than innovation. Johan's arrival didn't feel like an explosion. It felt like a fuse had been lit. Training at Ajax was demanding. Sharp passes, endless drills, icy winds that sliced through the open fields. But for Johan, it was never about endurance. It was about intention. Every touch had meaning. Every movement had purpose. He started to see not just the play in front of him, but the 1-2 steps away. He debuted in 1964. Just 17. Scored in his first match. The newspapers took notice, but they didn't understand what they were seeing yet. This wasn't just another young talent. This was a new logic, wearing boots. As Ajax evolved, so did Johan. He learned to lead without shouting, to dominate a match without always touching the ball. His vision stretched across the pitch like a web, sensing when to press, when to drop, when to disappear into space. The defenders didn't know where he went. He didn't either. He just knew why. Michaels saw the opportunity to build something radical. Not 11 individuals, but a system in motion, a collective intelligence, total football. It wasn't born from theory. It was born from necessity. Space was limited. Defenders were growing faster. The old game was dying. A new one had to be born. And so it began, slowly, subtly. Johan swapping positions mid-match. Defenders pushing forward. Midfielders covering space like dancers in a silent choreography. It confused opponents. It delighted fans. And it made Ajax unstoppable. Demir became the temple of this new faith. The stands, once cold and quiet, now trembled with energy. Fans didn't just cheer for goals. They cheered for movements, for patterns, for the intelligence of it all. Johan became their prophet, their conductor. But he never saw himself as a savior. He was still the boy from Betondorp, questioning everything, seeking perfection, seeing what others missed. While others trained harder, he trained smarter. While others followed plans, he built them. The city around him began to reflect the same energy. Amsterdam in the late 60s was bursting with change. Music, art, protest. The world was rethinking everything. And in its heart, Johan Cruyff was rethinking football. There were critics, of course, voices that called him arrogant, undisciplined, strange. But results silenced them. Ajax began to win. Not just matches, but admiration. They weren't just beating teams, they were redefining how the game could be played. And Johan? He didn't slow down. He couldn't, because the game was always moving, and he was already imagining what came next. It began with a question. What if positions didn't matter? For most of football's history, the game was about roles. Defenders defended, strikers attacked, midfielders ran in straight lines. But in Johan Cruyff's mind, these rules were made to be broken, not out of rebellion, but out of reason. Because football, he believed, wasn't about positions, it was about space. At Ajax, under the eye of Rinus Michels, this idea began to take form, not in a meeting room or on a blackboard, but in motion, in practice, in rhythm. Players switched roles mid-play. Defenders surged forward. Wingers dropped deep. Everyone moved. Everyone thought. It was organized chaos, and it worked. They called it total football, a system where no player was fixed, where every position could be filled by another, and where intelligence mattered more than muscle. But for Johan, it was more than a tactic. It was an expression of how he saw the world. He believed in simplicity. Playing football is very simple, he once said. But playing simple football is the hardest thing there is. To play simply required vision, anticipation, an understanding of geometry, time, pressure. Most players chase the ball. Johan chased understanding. He'd stand still for moments, not out of fatigue, but to observe, to let space speak. He'd drift wide to pull a defender, then cut inside to receive a pass no one expected. His movements seemed effortless, but behind them was calculation. Cruyff wasn't reacting. He was conducting. The midfield, once a battlefield of collisions and grit, became a place of flow. Players moved like water, shifting, sliding, supporting. Johan often acted as the pivot, the brain between defense and attack. But he could also be the finisher, the instigator, or the invisible link between phases. He was everywhere and nowhere. At the heart of it all was trust. Total football only worked if each player trusted the others to think, to move, to cover. It demanded more than fitness. It demanded awareness. It demanded teammates who could read not only the ball, but each other's minds. Training changed. Patterns replaced drills, triangles replaced straight lines, small spaces became laboratories. Johan relished this. He didn't just want to play better, he wanted to understand why better was possible, and then make it happen. Opponents were confused. They'd mark Johan tightly, only to find him gone, replaced by a midfielder or a drifting fullback. Defenders were pulled out of shape. Goalkeepers faced attacks from every angle, and in the middle of this swirling movement, Cruyff glided calmly, always one touch ahead. This was the beginning of football as thought. It wasn't just athletic, it was intellectual. It required memory, intuition, vision. And Johan had all three. He wasn't the fastest runner, but he was always where he needed to be. Not by chance, but by design. Fans noticed. They began to see football differently. Not just as a contest, but as a language, a dance, a conversation between minds played out on grass. And Johan, thin and sharp-eyed, became its most fluent speaker. Ajax dominated. Titles followed. But more importantly, A new way of thinking spread. Coaches began to adapt. Players began to question. The game itself began to evolve. And it all started with a few experiments at Demir, with chalk lines, shifting roles, and a boy from Betondorp who saw what others couldn't. Yet Cruyff remained humble in his curiosity. He never believed he had all the answers, only better questions. And through those questions, football changed forever. In 1974, the world gathered to witness a tournament. But what they saw was something else. A movement, a revelation, a team that played the game in a way it had never been played before. At the center of it all was Johan Cruyff, wearing the number 14, leading a Dutch squad that didn't just play football, they redefined it. It was the World Cup in West Germany. The air was heavy with history. The Cold War loomed. Old powers stood tall. But then came the Dutch, fluid, fearless, and dressed in bright orange. Their play was fast, intelligent, and utterly unpredictable. They passed not just with precision, but with purpose. They moved not as individuals, but as one organism. The world was in awe. From the first whistle, the Netherlands showed they were unlike anything football had seen. In their opening match, they dismantled Uruguay with surgical speed. They outplayed Argentina, crushed East Germany, and humbled Brazil. But it wasn't just the scorelines. It was the way they played. Their movement, their control, their vision. Opponents chased shadows. The Dutch controlled time itself, and at the center of the web was Cruyff. He didn't just play the game. He read it, dictated it. His presence alone was enough to disorient defenses. He drifted across the pitch, creating triangles, forcing mismatches. He would start on the wing, drop deep, then appear in the box with perfect timing. He was both conductor and storm. The world called it total football. But for the Dutch, it was simply logical. Why should players stand still when the ball is always moving? Why follow the lines when you can bend them? For Cruyff, these weren't questions. They were answers. The semi-final against Brazil was brutal, both in quality and intensity. Brazil, the defending champions, tried to muscle the Dutch out of rhythm. But rhythm, once set in motion, is hard to stop. The Dutch moved, passed, pressed, recovered. And then Cruyff struck. One goal, then another. Precision, grace, inevitability. The final awaited. West Germany. A clash of styles, but more than that. A clash of philosophies. Efficiency versus expression. Structure versus freedom. The game took place in Munich, under the weight of history and the heat of expectation. Before the Germans even touched the ball, the Netherlands had scored. It was the perfect beginning. Cruyff danced through defenders, was brought down in the box, and the penalty was converted. 1-0. The script was unfolding. But football doesn't follow scripts. West Germany didn't panic. They adjusted. They grounded the Dutch. The flow turned into friction. And then, in a flash, they equalized. Before halftime, they were ahead. In the second half, the Netherlands pushed. They passed. They pressed. Cruyff searched for space, for rhythm, for that one perfect opening. But the Germans held. Time slipped away. The whistle blew. 1. West Germany were champions. But that night, something strange happened. The world didn't celebrate the winner. They remembered the game, the beauty, the Dutch, Johan. It was a loss, but not a defeat, because what the Netherlands had given the world wasn't a trophy. It was a new way to understand football. Cruyff walked off the pitch that night not as a runner-up, but as a visionary. He hadn't just played the final. He had reshaped the game on its biggest stage, and though the medal around his neck was silver, his influence would shine far longer than gold. In the months that followed, children imitated his turns. Coaches rewatched the matches not to copy, but to learn. Writers struggled to find the right words. Art, some said. Revolution, said others. But perhaps it was simply football, finally seen through a new lens. Cruyff never forgot that final. Not because of what it cost, but because of what it proved. The game, he believed, should always be played with intelligence, courage, and joy. And even when you lose, if you've changed the way the world thinks, that's victory. When Johan Cruyff arrived in Barcelona in 1973, he didn't just sign with a football club. He stepped into a region yearning for identity, a people longing to be seen. Catalonia was not simply part of Spain. It was a culture, a history, a voice. And for decades, that voice had been silenced. Under the Franco regime, Catalan language and symbols had been suppressed. Expression was limited. National pride was forced into a single mold. But football had always offered a quiet kind of resistance. And now, Barcelona, the club that called itself more than a club, had found a new symbol of rebellion. His name was Johan. He came not just as a player, but as a presence, slim, sharp, and unapologetically bold. He played with a grace that defied force, a clarity that made chaos seem elegant. And the people of Barcelona recognized something familiar in him: defiance through brilliance. The team was in crisis when he arrived. Real Madrid dominated. Barcelona was adrift. The locker room was fractured, the board disillusioned. But Cruyff brought with him not just vision, but belief. He demanded the ball, demanded movement, demanded trust. He quickly became the beating heart of the squad. Teammates began to play differently, faster, freer, more aware. He didn't bark orders, he modeled intelligence, and it was contagious. His most iconic moment came early. In 1974, Barcelona destroyed Real Madrid 5-0 at the Bernabeu. For Catalonia, it wasn't just a victory, it was vindication. A public, undeniable moment of pride, broadcast across Spain. It was as if, through football, they had reclaimed something stolen. But Johan offered more than goals and trophies. He gave the club a philosophy. Football wasn't about size or strength. It was about space, timing, and intelligence. His way of playing became Barcelona's way of being. He rejected fear. He rejected compromise. He insisted on joy, on movement, on thinking faster than your feet. He spoke little Spanish, but football was his language, and everyone understood it. Cruyff stayed only a few years as a player, but he left a seed, one that would take root, grow, and bloom decades later when he returned, not with boots, but with a whistle. Still, in those early years, he became something rare, a foreigner who felt native. The streets of Barcelona hummed with his name. Children mimicked his turns in dusty courtyards, shop windows filled with orange shirts. He didn't just belong to the club, he belonged to the city. Catalonia saw in Cruyff a kind of mirror. He was outspoken, clever, resistant to authority. He played football with the same spirit they carried through dictatorship, light on its feet, impossible to pin down. And Johan, in return, fell in love with Barcelona, with its rhythm, with its beauty, with its people. He walked the old streets not as a visitor, but as someone finding home. He watched the city rise from shadows. He saw murals return, heard the Catalan language flow again in cafes and parks. Football and freedom were entangled here, and he, somehow, stood at the center of both. He never shouted slogans. He didn't carry a flag, but he gave them something deeper: confidence. Barcelona began to believe it could not only win, but win its way. That identity was not a burden, but a strength. And long after he left the pitch, his influence remained. He had changed not just how they played, but how they thought. And when he returned as coach, he would finish what he started. To the world, he was a genius. To fans, a legend. To teammates, a leader. But behind the sharp passes and sharper quotes, behind the number 14 and the swaggering brilliance, there was a man. Flawed, stubborn, human. Johan Cruyff lived with conviction, not just on the pitch, but in every part of his life. He questioned rules, challenged authority, and refused to accept anything that didn't make sense to him. He didn't follow systems. He built his own. As a young man, he could be fiery, mistrusting of managers, dismissive of journalists, resistant to tradition. But that edge, that refusal to bend, was part of his brilliance. He wasn't interested in comfort. He was interested in clarity. He spoke in riddles sometimes, yet always with purpose. Every disadvantage has its advantage, he'd say. You play football with your head, and your legs are there to help you. These weren't just quotes. They were fragments of a worldview. Away from the game, he was deeply loyal. To his wife Danny, whom he married young, and with whom he built a quiet life amid all the noise. To his children, especially Jordi, whose name alone was a bold statement. Given, during the final years of Franco's rule, it was a public embrace of Catalan identity. He was also incredibly private. Fame never suited him. Crowds wore him down. What he craved was conversation, real, challenging, thoughtful. He read constantly. He studied the world beyond football. And when he spoke about the game, it was never just about tactics. It was about philosophy, about values, about life. Money never drove him, though he was sharp with it. He'd once refused to wear Adidas boots, not for comfort, but because Puma paid him more. But beneath the business side was a man who gave generously, often quietly. He funded projects, supported youth academies, donated to hospitals. Fame made him cautious, but not cold. As he aged, he softened, but never dulled. He became a mentor, a teacher, a voice that commanded respect without shouting. Young players, old coaches, even rivals came to him for insight. He never claimed to know everything, but he always knew how to ask the right question. He smoked too much. He argued freely. He walked out of meetings if he found them pointless. But he was also fiercely protective of those he trusted. He had no time for fools, but all the time in the world for potential. Cruyff saw football not as escape, but as reflection of society, of thinking, of the individual in balance with the collective. He believed that how you played the game said something about how you saw the world. And he wanted that world to be creative, brave, honest. He wasn't always easy to like, but he was impossible not to admire. Even in retirement, he remained in motion, writing columns, advising clubs, and speaking his mind with undiminished clarity. He never hid behind legacy. He lived in the present, always seeking the next solution. He once described football as a game you play with your brain, but he lived all of life that way. He was constantly scanning the field of people, of politics, of problems, looking for openings, looking for ways to move forward. His sharp tongue didn't fade with age. He could still dismantle a boardroom with a sentence, but he used that sharpness more carefully. To protect the game, to protect the players, to protect the idea that football could be beautiful. As illness began to shadow his final years, he met it with calm defiance. He once said he felt he was 2-0 up in the first half, and that he would keep fighting. Not with grand gestures, but with grace. He didn't want pity. He wanted truth. He didn't want to be remembered with tears. He wanted to be understood. In private, he spent time with family. In public, he continued to inspire. And even as his voice grew softer, it never lost its clarity. When Johan spoke, people still listened. Not because he was famous, but because he was right. In the end, what defined Johan Cruyff wasn't just what he did on the pitch. It was how he lived, with thought, with integrity, and with the courage to be different. He had no patience for small thinking, no interest in easy answers. He was difficult, demanding, visionary, vulnerable. And that's what made him real. That's what made him unforgettable. Johan Cruyff never set out to become a coach. He didn't need the title. He didn't crave the bench. But something inside him, some restless need to shape, to improve, to question, wouldn't let him walk away from the game. By the late 1980s, FC Barcelona was once again searching for identity. The club had trophies but no soul. It had stars but no system. Cruyff returned not as a savior, but as a mirror, reflecting what the club could be if it dared to think differently. He didn't train players. He trained minds. He tore down routines. He asked questions that unsettled. Why defend deep when you can press high? Why kick long when you can pass short? Why follow tradition when you can build the future? He scrapped rigid formations. He removed unnecessary rules. He replaced drills with scenarios. His sessions looked chaotic to outsiders, but they were finely tuned puzzles of movement, vision, and instinct. Above all, he trusted youth. He brought in players others thought too fragile, too raw. Pep Guardiola, Albert Ferrer, Sergi, players who would later shape the game themselves. Cruyff didn't want soldiers. He wanted thinkers. At the heart of his vision was the belief that football should be played with joy, that the ball should move with elegance. That space was more important than strength. He built teams that danced, not fought. He often said, "Choose the best player for each position, and you'll end up not with a strong team, but with 11 strong individuals." For Cruyff, the team was always greater than the sum of its parts, and every part had to understand the whole. Results came quickly, but not always steadily. He lost matches, he clashed with the board, he offended sponsors, but he stayed true to his ideas, even when they were unpopular. Because to him, winning without style wasn't really winning at all. His greatest achievement came in 1992, when Barcelona won their first ever European Cup. It wasn't just a trophy, it was proof. Proof that beauty and victory could walk hand in hand. That team, later called the Dream Team, didn't just dominate, it inspired. Fans sang his name, players absorbed his wisdom, and the club began to shift. Not just in tactics, but in culture. But it wasn't all celebration. Cruyff could be stubborn, sharp, unforgiving. His relationships with club directors often broke down. He didn't bend for politics. He didn't massage egos. He expected people to care as much as he did. He made enemies, but he also created disciples. Young coaches followed him closely, taking notes not just on his formations, but on his philosophy. He didn't believe in copying. He believed in understanding. And once you understood, you could build your own path. Eventually, his time at the club ended not with a ceremony, but with a split. The board dismissed him. The stadium fell silent. But what he had built could not be undone. Cruyff left behind more than a record. He left a blueprint, a way of thinking, a way of playing, a generation raised not on orders, but on vision. Years later, as Barcelona lifted trophy after trophy under Guardiola, under Luis Enrique, under others, they were still playing Cruyff's game. Possession, movement, intelligence, pressure, joy. He had changed the club forever. Not by demanding greatness, but by trusting that it was already there, waiting to be set free. They called it the Dream Team. But for Johan Cruyff, it was never about dreams. It was about ideas made visible, a philosophy in motion, 11 players acting as one. In the early 1990s, FC Barcelona became something the football world had never truly seen before. Not just successful, but expressive. Not just feared, but admired. Under Cruyff's leadership, the club entered a golden era built not on money or luck, but on belief. At the heart of the Dream Team was a set of principles, not superstars. Cruyff selected players not for size or fame, but for intelligence, for their ability to understand space, rhythm, and the timing of movement. He trusted technical ability over brute strength, creativity over repetition. In Pep Guardiola, he saw a mind as sharp as his own. In Hristo Stoichkov, he found fire. In Ronald Koeman, calm precision. And in Michael Laudrup, elegance. These weren't just players. They were instruments in Cruyff's orchestra. They played a 3-4-3 system, radical at the time. One fewer defender, one extra thinker. It was risky. It was beautiful. Fullbacks pushed high. Midfielders drifted wide. Everyone moved. Everyone adapted. The pitch was a canvas, and the ball was the brush. Training was relentless, not physically. Brutal, but mentally exact. Cruyff demanded understanding. Drills became lessons. Mistakes were discussed, not punished. He didn't want blind obedience. He wanted clarity. He once said, "I don't need players who run a lot. I need players who think fast." And so his team moved with a kind of calculated freedom, structure without rigidity. Between 1991 and 1994, Barcelona won 4 consecutive La Liga titles. In 1992, they conquered Europe, lifting the European Cup at Wembley. It was the club's first. It felt like a beginning. For many fans, it still feels like the turning point when Barcelona truly became Barca. But the Dream Team was more than trophies. It was a statement that football could be joyful at the highest level. That attack was not recklessness, but intent. That beauty had value, even under pressure. Fans filled the Camp Nou not just to see goals, but to witness imagination, to see triangles form and dissolve in seconds, to see defenders join attacks and strikers drop into midfield. The line between positions blurred. The game became fluid. Cruyff stood on the sidelines, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, not barking orders, but absorbing, trusting. He believed in his players, and in return, they believed in the system. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. His impact wasn't only felt on match days. The club's entire structure began to change. Youth academies were aligned with the same philosophy. Coaches were trained to prioritize vision over strength, ideas over repetition. The system became self-sustaining, but no golden age lasts forever. Internal tensions grew. Some players clashed. Results dipped. Cruyff's relationship with the board deteriorated. The press, once admiring, turned sharp. And eventually, in 1996, the club let him go. There was no farewell match, no grand send-off, just silence. Cruyff, once again, walked away. Not bitter, but certain. He had done what he came to do. He had planted something permanent, because what he left behind wasn't just a style of play. It was a culture, a conviction, a belief that football could be more than results. The Dream Team became the blueprint. Its echoes can still be heard. Every time Barcelona play with courage and control, every pass with purpose, every press with intention, every moment of joy on the ball. Guardiola, once his pupil, would carry the torch years later, winning everything, playing the same music, in a new rhythm, and others followed. Because Cruyff hadn't built a team, he'd built a language, one that others could learn, evolve, and speak in their own way. He had shown that greatness didn't come from control, but from freedom within structure, from trust, from daring to do it differently. And though the dream team eventually ended, the dream itself never did. Some legacies are etched in stone. Others are written in the air, seen only through movement, passed down in how a ball is touched, how a team shapes itself, how a game is played. Johan Cruyff's legacy lives not in monuments, but in motion. He changed football, but more than that, he changed how people think about football. His influence stretches from the streets of Betondorp to the great stadiums of the world, from dusty schoolyards to modern training academies. Wherever the game is played with intelligence, with flair, with freedom, Cruyff is present. He taught the world that football wasn't just about results. It was about expression. He made it clear that winning is important, but how you win defines you. That message took root in Barcelona, in Amsterdam, in Manchester, in Munich, in Tokyo, in Cape Town. Even those who never saw him play speak his language. The press and possess style of Guardiola, the youth-first vision of Ajax, the positional, play studied in coaching seminars around the world. It all carries echoes of Johan. But his legacy is more than tactical. It's philosophical. He asked why things were done a certain way, and if the answer wasn't good enough, he changed it. He wanted football to reflect life at its best, creative, fair, fluid, joyful. He also gave power back to the player. In a world of systems and structures, he reminded everyone that the person on the pitch is the one who decides. That intelligence beats muscle. That courage beats caution. He didn't leave behind an empire. He left behind ideas. That's why his influence survives systems, trends, and even time. Even in his final years, as illness crept in, Cruyff remained clear. He continued to speak, to write, to guide. He didn't cling to the past. He focused on what was next. And even after his passing, the world didn't stop hearing him. Quotes still circulate. His principles still guide. Young players still study his moves. Coaches still whisper his name when they draw triangles in the grass. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't easy. But he was true. And that truth continues to move through the game like wind through a field. Unseen, but felt. What he gave the world wasn't a system to copy. It was a way to see the game. A lens that reveals not just what is, but what could be. His influence can be found in how children train in youth academies, in how clubs build their identity, in how coaches question the traditions they inherit. He opened football's mind. Today, his quotes are etched into walls, repeated in documentaries, and printed in coaching manuals. But the real legacy is quieter. It lives in the decisions players make in the flow of a match, in the courage to take a risk, in the elegance of a simple pass made at the perfect moment. In Barcelona, his statue stands. In Amsterdam, his name is on the stadium. But more importantly, his thinking is everywhere. Even beyond football, people have drawn from him. Entrepreneurs, teachers, designers, anyone trying to make something better, more beautiful, more human, because that's what Johan was ultimately about, making things better. He didn't preach perfection. He invited improvement. He didn't demand loyalty. He inspired trust. He didn't force control. He encouraged creativity. When he passed away in 2016, the tributes came from every corner of the world. Clubs, fans, politicians, strangers. But no tribute could fully capture what he gave. because his legacy isn't something that ended. It's something that keeps beginning. Cruyff believed that football was a mirror to life, that the way you play says something about the way you think, the way you see others, the way you move through the world. And so, every time someone chooses vision over violence, trust over control, beauty over brute force, that's him. That's his echo. Because Johan Cruyff didn't just leave a mark, he left a way forward. Johan Cruyff never chased immortality. He didn't want statues. He didn't ask for his name on stadiums. What he wanted, what he insisted on, was that people think, that they challenge assumptions, that they play the game and live life with intention. But even those who try not to become legends often end up as one. Cruyff's story doesn't end with a final match or a final breath. It lingers, in voices that quote him, in teams that play like him, in children who kick a ball, with imagination instead of fear. His life was a thread that pulled the sport into a new era, and even now the fabric of football still carries his imprint. His greatest power wasn't his foot, or his vision, or his tactics. It was his clarity. Cruyff had a way of seeing what others missed, not because he had more information, but because he understood what mattered. In a world of noise, he taught people to listen to the rhythm beneath it all. That clarity became his gift to others. He didn't keep his insights to himself. He spoke plainly. He wrote, he advised, he built foundations for children. He founded schools, not just academies. Because to him, football was education, and education was power. He saw the sport as a classroom. The pitch was a place to grow, not just as a player, but as a person. You learned to move, to read, to trust, to wait, to create. He didn't want robots. He wanted minds in motion. His foundation, launched after his retirement, focused on giving opportunities to kids with disabilities. It wasn't charity. It was logic. Everyone deserved a chance to play. Everyone deserved space to think, to move, to express. And if football could offer that, then it had to. Long after the press conferences stopped, after the stadiums fell silent, his voice still carried. Coaches quote him, often without knowing. Players mimic movements they never saw live. Fans speak of him not just with nostalgia, but with relevance. He reminds us that brilliance doesn't have to be loud, that the most powerful revolutions begin not with anger, but with imagination. He didn't raise fists. He raised standards. Even now, he shows up, sometimes in a touch, a turn, a pass no one saw coming. Sometimes in a quote on the wall of a dressing room. Sometimes in silence, when a coach trusts a young player to figure it out on their own. Cruyff taught that pressure was a privilege. That simplicity was strength. That freedom required discipline. That the ball always moved faster than the player, and that the head must move even faster than the ball. He believed the game was meant to be played beautifully, not just for aesthetics, but because beauty was efficient. Precision was power. A well-timed pass was more devastating than a sprint. A clever feint, more lasting than a shove. In a time when money floods the game and headlines chase drama, Cruyff's voice cuts through like wind on an open field, reminding us that the game, at its heart, is still the same. A ball, a pitch, an idea. And for those who listen closely, he's still there. In Amsterdam, the stadium bears his name, but his true monument is in the way people play, in the way they think, in the questions they ask. Why? Why not? What if? He didn't leave behind a doctrine. He left behind a mindset, a way of thinking that doesn't fear mistakes, but demands understanding, that doesn't copy the past, but learns from it. Johan Cruyff didn't just change football, He revealed what it could be, and when the final whistle blew, when the lights dimmed and the chants faded, his legacy didn't go quiet. It passed from foot to foot, from voice to voice, from generation to generation, not as a memory, but as movement,